Hello and welcome to our next episode of Fellowship in Essential Oils. My name is Adam. I'm joined by Liz. How are you today, Liz?
I'm very rosy today. Thank you, Adam.
Funny you should say that. And I'm gonna throw a question at you to start off with. We often talk about our inner circle of oils and ones that we use a lot, but if you had to pick your top three favorite essential oils, what would you choose?
It would be geranium, rose, and myrrh.
Well, I would go sandalwood, Douglas fir, which sometimes would argue a little bit with maybe black spruce would get in there, and rose would also be one of my top three. So it's about blooming time that we talked about rose, and that's what we're discussing today.
And what extraction of rose are we talking?
Well, I guess we could talk about the steam distilled and the absolute, but
Yeah,
the
so
one that I work with, go on.
I like the absolute way more than the auto distillation. When I say rose oil, that's what I mean. I mean the
Yeah.
absolute.
Are you talking about that just because of the richness of the aroma or the chemistry as well?
The richness, yeah. There's not that much difference in the chemistry, really, but the depth of it, I think, yeah.
Yeah. Now there's really beautiful kind of uses for rose, and we kind of straight away go to skincare. One study that was really interesting that was done by John Hopkins University in America, is they were given a whole range of essential oils, and they tried testing them against a whole range of different bacterias and viruses and different things like that. And guess which one was the best performer?
Rose
Rose.
is the best of them all, was it?
One thing that's been found, and this is not my area of specialty, but when it comes to bacteria, there are two main types. There's gram positive
Yeah.
and gram negative. And normally when you like if you need antibiotics, they'll give you a medication that will tackle one or the other. They actually have found that rose can tackle both, which makes it really great. And I've collected stories over time where people, especially with skin infections, bacterial skin infections, rose has worked absolute wonders for that. So I pop it on my face all the time because I love the smell and I know it's got benefits for the skin. But yeah, for bacterial infections on the skin, it's something you may not think about with rose.
No, and oh, see, I've got a cough. Sorry, it's the heater, I think. Yeah, it wouldn't be an oil that I would immediately go to for bacteria, but yeah, there's nothing comes close to it to skin. Full stop. I don't think. And I'm a bit of a cheat when it comes to skincare because I was brought up in a house where mum made ridiculous amounts of skincare. So she would be appalled to know that I kind of just have my bottle and go, oh, what have I got here? Stick a drop of that while it goes on my face. But yeah, I do think that there's nothing comes close to it in terms of nourishing the skin, but also just the way that it makes you feel.
Yeah. Now, do you ever use it for any kind of skin complaints, or is it more kind of for you a beauty oil?
Um, I do use it for seborrheic dermatitis and
Hmm.
for malassezia, which is like a fungal infection. But I tend to blend it with other things that would work for that. So for like seborrheic dermatitis with myrrh, for malassezia, sometimes with patchouli as well.
Okay, yeah. And anything that you would, when it comes to rose, I was kind of reflecting before we jumped on today of like, where else does rose kind of step in? And apart from skin, is there anywhere else you would use it for other systems of the body on a physical
Oh,
level?
yes. Oh, yes.
Good.
Gynecology generally, but all kinds of like hormonal balance. Um, so I have written a book. I will do one of my shameless plugs called Rose Goddess Medicine. Lights in it. And there's probably my favourite bit in that book is a trial that was done in 2015, and it collected together people from all over the world. So I should have done my revision. So there was a team in Switzerland, whom I think were an addiction team. There was some in Iran, some in India, and they were all working with a set of men who were on antidepressants, SSRIs, and were sadly also suffering from sexual dysfunction as a side effect of the medication. So it wasn't, strictly speaking, Rose, it was citronellol that they used, and they didn't do it topically or as an inhalation. They did it as an oral dose. So to be able to emulate this would cost you a small fortune. However, what they were able to show was that after, so actually I've got to take my thing off, it's distracting me. I've done that bit now. So sexual dysfunction would be erectile dysfunction, delayed ejaculation, problems with getting an erection, so impotence, or not being able to sustain one. And what they were able to show was after 4 weeks, the the feelings of depression were waning, and that most of them were seeing an improvement in libido. Well, after 8 weeks, if I remember rightly, 80% of them reported no more sexual dysfunction, and they were all said, I don't feel depressed either. So that is really important medicine, because we all talk about it being a woman's oil, woman's medicine, and without a shadow of a doubt, tremendous for PMT, tremendous for PMS generally, actually, so period pains, and aligning the menstrual cycle, but also for menopause, although I would always say that neroli would be better for menopause, but it is really good for menopause. So we if we're not careful, cut off a whole set of people that can really have tremendous uses for it. So hormonal balance definitely is really, really important. It's laxative. So people who have got problems with constipation, but actually IBS generally, because it has a really profound effect on the nervous system, which I'll talk about in a minute. And funnily enough, renal colic. So that's so out there, but it does have a tonic effect on the kidneys. So if somebody's got those kind of pains within the genitourinary system, renal colic really responds well to rose oil. And what's difficult is the cross section is sometimes the medicine's about rose essential oil, sometimes it's about absolute, so we kind of roll them into one, to be honest. But I would say, really, from the point of view of, right, well, which one do you use? Really, the only kind of difference is the fragrance. Rose Absolute has more of a use, I think, in perfumery, because it's so much fuller and it's richer and kind of hangs around longer. It's so ephemeral, isn't it, Rose Otto? But otherwise, the medicine is the same across. So yeah, all of those, I think, it's hypnotic. So it's proven to help people get to sleep better and to sleep longer. It's also proven to have an anti-conflict element to it, which also lavender does as well. So that's really helpful for one of the areas that it's been explored for, really, which is withdrawal from opioids. So imagine that somebody is in withdrawal. They have all sorts of horrible kind of side effects, from the diarrhea to scratching and feeling like, their skin's crawling, they're pacing up and down, they're doing all manner of things. So this was tested, they made some poor blooming rats dependent on drugs and then used the rose, but it managed to bring down every single symptom of the withdrawal, except for the diarrhea, which is, as I say, it is laxative anyway, so you wouldn't expect to see that. But this kind of bad-tempered, but also depressed, and somebody who's grieving, it's really an important medicine for grief as well.
So I wanted to ask one question, because I noticed if a question pops into my head, it's probably popping into others as well. You're talking way back. I'm asking for a friend, but you talked about male depression and the sexual performance and that kind of thing. They were obviously taking it orally. Now,
Yes.
if people wanted to use their rose essential oil in a similar way, what would you recommend in that context?
So it's an emulation of Chinese medicine. So there is like a Chinese rose tea that works really well, and so this is why they pursued that. Funnily enough, I got asked this in a different way question yesterday. Somebody wanted an edible rose oil, and I was like, I really don't understand why you would waste your money that way. Because you're going to have similar effects with inhalation. You're going to have similar effects with topical use. You could drink rose water. So rather than going, I certainly wouldn't want to eat rose absolute in cases like a hexane residue from the solvent extraction. But really, you've got to be Rockefeller to be able to afford to drink rose otto essential oil. So I would be saying, right, I'd use it topically. I'd certainly use it as an inhalant, and I'd be drinking rose water or rose tea.
Yeah, beautiful. I must admit, I went out for lunch today and we had watermelon juice with rose water.
Oh my goodness,
amazing combination if you haven't tried it.
Oh, yeah, so I cook a lot with rose water. Like if we're in like a ritual setting and I've got people coming, like, and we want to sort of invoke Aphrodite, then I do a lot of rose cooking, and rose water is fantastic for taste, but also you do get that sense of like imbibing rose. You kind of get the physicality of it when you do.
Very true, very true. And that kind of leads me into something else I was going to bring up today about rose is, the Greeks had amazing stories for so many different creations of so many different plants. And when we did Cyprus recently, we talked about Saprasios and Apollo, and how the cypress tree came to be. So the Greek story I've heard for rose was that the goddess of flowers and plants, called Chloris, found the body of a beautiful dead nymph and thought, she is far too beautiful to let go of, so I'm going to turn her into a flower. But she wanted to make it the most beautiful flower ever. And so she called upon Aphrodite to give the flower its beauty. And then she called upon Dionysus, who some may not have heard of, but he's the god of wine, to give the flower its alluring aroma and nectar. And then she called upon Zephyrus, the god of the west wind, and west is the direction of love, to blow all the clouds out of the way so that Apollo could shine his radiant sun beauty onto the flower and allow it to blossom for the first time. And I just love this idea of all these different gods and goddesses coming together to create, which probably I would argue is, maybe Blue Lotus could give it a good run for its money, but the queen of the flowers, and that is rose. And I think that really kind of encapsulates the magic of rose and how many different ways it can be used in a holistic level as well.
I agree. And I mean, the earliest symbol that we see of the rose dates back 5,000 years to the goddess Inanna. She was a Sumerian goddess. And it's like an 8-pointed star, actually, when you see it. And it was on the door in one of her temples where all of the offerings for her were to be put. And you see this kind of connection with the rose and the Queen of Heaven right the way through 5,000 years. And even it exists now in that we call Mary Queen of Heaven. And you'll hear like Christmas carols where it says there is no rose of such virtue as bears the child whose name was Yehuzu or whatever. So even for 5,000 years later, it still says divine feminine queen of heaven. What's interesting is you talk about that Zephyr, the god of the west. So West was what to you? What did you say West was?
The direction of love, normally associated with the element of water.
Correct. So that's what I was going to say. So it is water, and water rules the rose. Aphrodite, of course, was goddess of love, and she would plunge in and out of the water. She was always in and out of the water. But also the West, when you're looking at mythology, West is the land of the dead. And so you also have this, there's another kind of origin story, again, Aphrodite, this time with Adonis, who is born of a myrrh tree. We won't go down that road, but she falls completely in love with Adonis, and she doesn't want to let him out of her sight. And then a boar comes out of the forest and gores him, and he dies. And where his blood runs and her tears merge, some myths say an anemone grew, others say a rose grew. So there's this love and death association again. Yeah,
really interesting. In crystal mythology, there's actually that same story. Aphrodite's blood fell on, or it could have been Adonis's blood, but mainly Aphrodite's, as she ran to try and save Adonis. Her blood dropped onto some clear quartz and turned it pink, creating rose quartz, which is a crystal of love as well. So that whole incident, really, lots of different beautiful things came out of it, didn't it?
Yes, of course. And that, I mean, Adonis is one of those gods that you kind of is an afterthought in Greek mythology, but he's probably the main consort of a lot of mythology in his different names: Dumazi, Tammuz, Baal. In lots of different philosophies, he is the main consort, the main sort of god. It was like I am getting completely saturated in light now.
Apollo's having a shine on you. Yeah. Now, I guess we should talk a little bit. We've touched on death, but let's talk a little bit about love, because obviously rose is very much the flower of love. You know, I obviously use it in a lot of workings and people that are working with love, but I always say that the gift that rose brings us is unconditional love. Now, a lot of people go, oh, yeah, I love my partner unconditionally. I love my children unconditionally. So I always say to them, so if you came home and you found your partner in bed with your best friend and they'd thrown all your essential oils on the floor and got rid of them, would you still love them? And they're like, well, no, I wouldn't. Exactly. And I'm like, well, then it's conditional love, not unconditional love. Now, that's an extreme example, obviously, but a lot of the time we put expectations on how we want someone else to behave. And then I find it interesting talking to people in long-term relationships. You know, we fall in love with someone and we love them and they're perfect just the way they are. But over time, they start to annoy us. So we start to change them. And then 10 years later, we're disappointed because they're not the person we first got together with. No, it's because you've set a 10-year campaign trying to suit them and change them around as well. So what I find Rose is really good at practicing is that unconditional love. Imagine if we could love someone for who they are rather than who we wanted them to be. And if that meant that they wanted to do this or they wanted to do that, could we love them regardless of that? And then imagine if we could learn to love others in that way, what permission that would grant to ourselves, that we could live our lives and love ourselves however we wanted to be without the need to try and fulfill other expectations and know that we were loved in that way. So not only can Rose help us to love other people unconditionally, it can allow us to step into unconditional love and live our life in that way, but also to realize that whatever we do, the universe will love us and support us, and that we don't always have to adhere to other people's expectations as well. So I like to kind of encourage people to think a little bit deeper about the spiritual aspects of love that Rose can open up for us. We know it's obviously going to be one of the most powerful essential oils of love. But I think just going, oh yeah, it's a romance oil, it's an aphrodisiac oil. No, how can it go into those next levels and really explore unconditional love?
Yeah, I agree. And I'll put it in the description, actually. I've got quite a lot of meditations with different oils, and I've got one for inner peace, which is for Rose, and it's one of the most listened to videos because everybody messages me and go, I just feel so calm and so much better about myself now I've listened to that and worked with Rose. As you say, a lot of it is about like the feeling of beauty from having Rose, and again, that's an Aphrodite thing, or Venus. You know, that's what we're talking about when we talk about medical astrology and these planetary rulerships. How it makes you feel is like the rulership of the plant. So this kind of loving and beauty, and actually, incidentally, money is also about the Venus kind of channel. And as I say, that's been in existence for 5,000 years. That feeling that that those goddesses are something to do with Rose.
Now, I do have your book on Rose, but it's in Australia because when I moved here to the Middle East, I was allowed one suitcase. And apart from clothing and a little small amount of oils and crystals, I couldn't bring much. What were some of the really interesting things you found out about Rose when you were writing your book?
Without a shadow of a doubt, that Iranian, that trial I talked about earlier. I really enjoyed, and I mean, like the stories that I enjoy when I'm writing the book aren't necessarily about what the oil does, if that makes sense. It's more the social conscience of the plant. So I really enjoyed learning about a distillery that actually I had the chance to go and visit in Bulgaria called Enyobonchev, and they're kind of the kings of the Rose, if you like. The finest oil comes from there. And what was interesting about theirs with the I can't remember exactly how long, but it had been in their family for hundreds of years, this distillery. But obviously, Bulgaria was a communist state for a while, and the government just took it. And it took all of the distilleries and just went, well, these are of the state now. I mean, can you imagine that happening? And so then the Rose oil became like a Bulgarian state thing. And it was only when the wall came down that they were able to take it back, and they were able to bring it back into the same family that it's been with all of the time. And so that was really interesting learning about that. So many cultures as well use Rose, and I really liked learning about Mecca. So when you go to Mecca, there's like a beetle, isn't there? Like a black stone. Well, that black stone gets washed with rose oil every day.
Wow.
So it's called the Taif rose. And it's a different, like a really treasured, sacred rose, and that gets used each day. Yeah.
Now, I guess when we go to maybe a rose garden or something like that, with my English grandparents, they loved a good rose garden, and that's been passed on to my mother. And I've got a bit of a thing for roses as well. You know, we can get all these different kind of varieties and different colors and things like that. But it's just one particular rose that really we get our rose essential oil and our absolute from, isn't it?
Yeah, well, no, there are different ones, but the main one that people know is Rosa Damascena.
Yeah.
And although you can get them from like Rosa alba, which is a white rose. Rosa centifolia is the Indian rose. So that's, if you know much about roses, they're like Rosa centifolia means 100 petals, looks like a cabbage rose. Rosa Damascena smells red, but is actually pale pink.
I know, I was a bit disappointed by that because
it's quite a drab looking plant. So I went to the rose harvest. I was taken to all the singing and dancing and stuff, and we went through, and it's quite there are definitely better roses, but and what's interesting is, like, when you walk down them, of course, it's the climate is just so perfect for them there, and the Rose Valley is in a valley, so it's protected from the wind and the heat, so it has this beautiful kind of like terroir, we would say. where it grows. So they all grow, as I say, they're quite shrubby looking. They're almost a bit like, well, in this country, what we have down the middle of the road, in the middle of the motorways, we always have like municipal roses, and they've got like dog roses. It looks a bit like that. And they're grown in fields which are parched. They're really, really dry. So the ground is really, really dry, and they're surrounded by like lots of weeds so that they stabilize the nutrients. So you're walking through, and it's not like walking through a rose garden at all. Not at all.
No, but at the end of the day, it gives us a very amazing essential oil, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, and I mean, if people don't know much about rose oil, what's really interesting is they have to pick it so early in the morning. So they get up around about 4 or 5 o'clock. The picking is finished by 8 o'clock, because by then the roses have opened too much and they'll lose too much oil. So then they have to wait till the next day. And then when you go to the distillery, there's these huge bags, clear bags, full of these rose petals. And you get close, and there's all the earwigs running around them and stuff. So they've just like taken the heads off. But as you walk in, the fragrance is astonishing, but also the air is pink, because there's so many volatiles coming up from the rose. The actual sort of sunrise is completely
Wow.
pink. Yeah.
And I have heard accounts of people being in the Valley of the Roses, and that a lot of the time the transport of the roses around is done more by horse and cart rather than vehicles, just to, again, reduce the amount of fumes going around. And this idea of the roses being transported on this old horse kind of trudging along a road, it really brings to the romance of the whole creation of the rose oil as well.
Yes, and I do think, though, there's also an element of playing to the tourists, because it's a massive tourist event when you go, and you should see how many Japanese are there. It's phenomenal. They come in their hundreds of thousands, and there's like, depending on whereabouts you go. So when we went to the actual harvest in the fields, they've got like huge, great big vats bubbling away with the flowers in them, and they're all singing and dancing in their traditional costumes. But that's not a distillery. You go to the distillery, there are the cars, there are definitely vans and stuff. But likewise, there is a rose parade. So it's like almost like a Mardi Gras of roses, and there's just cascades of roses, and the singers and dancers are all wearing all the roses. It's just magnificent.
Yeah. So obviously it is an expensive essential oil. I think it's one that we all need to have in our collection. When would you use rose, and when would you not use rose, do you think?
I would always use rose.
That's a good answer. I think I'd agree with you. It's worth it, and we're worth it.
Yeah. So something that I didn't talk about earlier was its effects on cortisol. So cortisol, of course, is a stress hormone, and it is tremendous at being able to switch off cortisol. So there's lots of trials where they've shown that the skin has got better because they haven't had the stress response, that the rose has been able to stop that. And an important sort of aspect of that, we never talked about postnatal medicine, but it's wonderful for like when you give birth and those days afterwards, and in particular for bonding with a baby. Every woman who has a baby should be given rose, in my opinion. Actually, when you understand a bit about cortisol, it really brings it home, to be honest. So, as I say, cortisol is a stress hormone, but we have a natural rhythm of cortisol. So, for example, when you get up in the morning, you have a spike of cortisol, and it should drop through the day. Not everyone's like that. So, for example, my son has Asperger's. People with Asperger's don't seem to have it for some reason. So this is part of like their clinical thing. But the other thing is that babies don't have it. So babies don't develop their own cycle of cortisol until they're 2 years old. Prior to that, their cortisol mimics their mum's. So if you think about these poor sort of I'm going to be so really stereotypical now, but these poor single moms at home, no help at all. Baby's crying, mum's stress goes up, baby's stress goes up, baby cries more. And so there's this awful cycle going round that really you can do a lot to prevent by stopping the cortisol spike by using Rose. So I would always go down that road. I would always use it for grief. I would sometimes use it for hormones. And what I mean by that is there are lots of times where you can supplement Rose for geranium. Geranium is cheaper. Where geranium would be far superior would be if somebody has been suffering from long-term stress, because then the cortisol's starting to wane and the adrenals are really not firing very well. Well, that's where geranium's really good at supporting the adrenals. So while we say geranium's poor man's rose, it's not. It's just different. But pretty much anything that Rose can do, so can geranium. But yeah, like you were saying about the affinity with the rose garden, I belong in a rose garden. You know, I'm so much happier and healthier when the roses are out. So it's kind of a crutch for me to have Rose around me.
Yeah. And I think, as we've kind of talked about the different uses today, it's one that just we need to get it into our life somehow, whether it be, you know, first thing in the morning to kind of help us with our cortisol levels and just kind of keep us, you know, blossoming for the day, or it obviously has some great advantages at night with our skincare in the bedroom and so on as well. So in my opinion, it's kind of, although it's an expensive oil, it's one that it's worth incorporating a little bit into each and every day when you can.
Yeah, and you don't need very much of it. It's one of those oils that will last you for quite a long time. But yeah, it is worth the money, definitely.
Yeah. Now, we normally end up on a discussion where we talk about the planetary or the astrological correspondence and the chakra. I don't think we're going to have many arguments today. I think we'd both agree with Venus and the heart chakra, wouldn't we?
Yeah, I agree. And specifically, when Venus is in retrograde, the bottle should be with you all of the time.
Yes, of course. When Venus does go into retrograde, she takes her loving energy away, and not just romantic relationships, but Venus governs all of our relationships. So they kind of get challenged, and it's a really good time to do a bit of a cost benefit analysis of all the relationships in your life during a Venus retrograde and go, hold on, while I'm having these troubles, are they still worth it? And it's an opportunity and a lesson to upgrade all of our relationships. So again, we can practice that unconditional love that I mentioned before for ourselves and for other people. Sometimes we stay friends with people just because we've always been friends, and maybe it's no longer time to do that. But a Venus retrograde, it happens less often than many of the other retrogrades, but yeah, you definitely want your rose oil near you at that time to really make sure that it's going on the heart chakra for sure.
There's a lovely sort of quote from the 17th century, I think, Emperor Jahangir, and he was adamant that his mother-in-law had invented rose oil. He said that what had happened was she was making rose water, and when she'd noticed there was a scum round the side of the bowl, and when she'd rubbed her finger, she was like, oh my goodness, what is this? There's your rose oil. And he presented her these fantastic pearls for the service to humanity that she'd had by doing that. And he said that rose oil restores hearts that have gone and brings back withered souls. And I've never heard anything quite so accurate in my life.
I think that's a beautiful way to finish today's episode. I think that really sums it up beautifully. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on Fellowship in Essential Oils. We'll be back next week to discover another gift of Mother Nature. Until then, take care.
Bye-bye.